All right, good evening. Call into order the July 10th, 2023 edition of the Town of Garner Planning Commission. Appreciate your all's patience as we had a slight delay to getting started, but here we are and happy to be here. The first order of business tonight is a swearing in of our newest member.
Okay, and if you would just repeat after me. I, Jehan Hodges, do solemnly and sincerely swear
I, Jehan Hodges, do solemnly and sincerely swear
that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States,
I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States,
that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina,
that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina,
and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof. And to the constitutional powers and authorities
and to the constitutional power and authorities
which are or may be established for the government thereof.
which are or may be established for the government thereof,
That I will endeavor to support,
that I will endeavor to support,
maintain, and defend the Constitution
maintain, and defend the Constitution
and laws of said state,
and laws of said state,
not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States.
not
Inconsistent.
inconsistent with
the
the
Constitution.
Constitution of the United States,
To the best of my knowledge and ability,
to the best of my knowledge and ability,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office as Planning Commissioner
the duties of my office as Planning Commissioner
for Town of Garner, so help me God.
for Town of Garner, so help me God.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Hodges.
Thank
For
you.
those who don't know, she'll be representing the ETJ for our Planning Commission. Happy to have you and
Happy to be here.
enjoy. All right. That will do. Thank you.
Okay. Gina Avent,
Here.
John Blasco,
Here.
Ralph Carson cannot be here tonight, so I will call Jehan Hodges,
Here.
Philip Jefferson,
Here.
Sherry Phillips,
Here.
and Michael Voiland.
Here.
That's 6 members present.
All right, thank you. Do we have any volunteers for the invocation or moment of reflection? Go for it.
Let's bow our heads. Oh, Lord, we thank you for the beautiful day that you provided for us to be here to do the work of the town of Garner. We ask that you be in our presence, allow us to hear and listen, learn, and be the commission that town of Garner needs us to be as we continue to move the town forward for the good of our residents. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. With that, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I make a motion that we adopt the agenda. A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, I will call the vote. Gina Avent,
Aye.
John Blasco,
Aye.
Jehan Hodges, Philip Jefferson,
Aye.
Sherry Phillips, and Michael Voiland.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on, the minutes from our previous meeting, the June 12th, 2023. Any comments, questions, concerns, discussion? Is there a motion?
I will make a motion to accept the minutes.
All right. Motion and a second.
Okay, I will call the vote. Gina Avent, John Blasco,
Aye.
Jehan Hodges, Philip Jefferson,
Aye.
Sherry Phillips, and Michael Voiland.
All right, thank you much. Moving on to the election of officers. First officer position up is chair. Do we have any nominations?
I nominate John Blasco to continue on as our chair.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Do we need to vote for that, or is that just done?
I'll just call the vote for.
Okay.
Okay. Gina Avent. Aye. John Blasco.
Aye.
Jehan Hodges.
Aye.
Philip Jefferson.
Aye.
Sherry Phillips.
Aye.
And Michael Voiland. That's unanimous.
Thank you. No, I kid. Next up would be election of the vice chair. Any nominations?
I nominate Philip Jefferson to continue as vice chair.
I'll second that.
Any discussions, questions, concerns? None?
Okay, I will call the vote. Gina Avent.
Aye.
John Blaska.
Aye.
Ralph Carson couldn't be here tonight, so I will call Jehan Hodges. Philip Jefferson.
Aye.
Sherry Phillips. And Michael Voiland.
All right. Congratulations, Mr. Jefferson. Thanks, everyone, for your trust in me to continue on. I will do my best to keep this ship rolling. All right, moving on to the next order of business, old and new business, Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan.
Good evening, Planning Commission members. This is something I kind of almost wish we had like a work session to call this, but we have our meetings. I'm open to going through this however you would like. I do have everything loaded up on the presentation computer. I had thought that maybe we could just kind of highlight through. We have the pages that have been changed as far as text from Mr. Noonkester at City Explained. We could go through those, I think, fairly quickly and just see if there's anything that you have questions about or questioned what he may have changed. We do have the maps printed out for you at your desk as well with the changes that have been made to those. There are a couple things with the maps where maybe the dots weren't quite where we expected, so my intent was to mark those up and just send those back to him to have a few of those dots shifted on the framework map. But otherwise, I think everything else was changed accordingly. And then once we finish with that, we can certainly have more discussion about the comp plan, anything else that you'd like to talk about. I do also, we put at your desk here this evening the first kind of memo that I presented to the town council about some possible text changes to the Unified Development Ordinance that we as staff thought would help to move us in the direction of being able to implement the comprehensive plan more effectively once, assuming it's adopted. So I did want to just spend a little bit of time going over that with you as well. I know Ashley has reached out to all of you. The council has asked if possible, they would like to have one more joint meeting with you at their work session later this month, just to kind of revisit the amendments here for the comp plan and to begin to talk about the UDO amendments, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, which I don't think is a bad thing. So again, just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview and orientation for those discussions that have happened as well. Does that sound suitable?
It's for me.
Okay. Then I will move. All right. Okay. So we do have the draft reloaded here. I will note that the first few pages were primarily just correcting some things. One was to get the official name of the All-America City Award correct, and then also to acknowledge the recent change in the naming of Fort Bragg. That was mentioned in the context, regional context. So also including the new name that has been adopted of Fort Liberty. And so that would take us then down to page 36. And here in initiative number 1, we did ask him to include some language that would remind everybody that ETJ expansion may not be as simple as we would like. It is currently in debate with the state legislature about whether or not towns will continue to have ETJ authority, and if we do, whether or not we're able to expand it. The current draft that is being discussed right now would allow us to continue to maintain the ETJ that exists today, but we would not be able to extend or expand it any further. The current draft has an implementation date of, I think, June 30th of this year. So it'd be one of those retroactive things as opposed to looking out to a date in the future. Moving over to initiative number 4, the consultant just added, again, there was a request to try to give a little more definitiveness to some of these land use type descriptions, something that was a little more quantifiable. So Matt did enter a few things there as far as acreage to expect and minimum square footages. Again, kind of emphasizing vertical mixed use where appropriate, and also that particularly when the balance of residential to non-residential is looked at, kind of how much residential should we be looking to allow in what would otherwise be a primarily non-residential or mixed-use kind of land area. So did anybody have any questions about what was posted there? So for in the Regional Employment Center here, he did note that it should accommodate at least 250,000 square feet of non-residential space, generally 12 acres or more, just to kind of give us some thoughts about that. Vertical mixed use in the center where possible, and that the standalone residential should definitely be secondary in these kinds of areas. And he continued that here in 5, 6, and 7. So for the Regional Retail Activity Center, again, 250,000 was kind of a threshold that he put in there, that it should be implemented in those kind of cases when you're having at least that much. And at least in this case, 25 acres of development. Again, emphasizing that the standalone residential would be secondary. That's kind of a consistent theme throughout. The same with the regional transit activity centers. So you'll notice in the regional transit activity center, he does include a range of 50 to 250. So we're compacting a little bit. In the transit centers, you're more emphasis on vertical than spread. Kind of the same with the community activity centers. Those aren't going to necessarily be transit-centric, but there should be probably transit service adjacent, either now or in the future. So again, kind of that 50 to 250,000 square feet kind of size, along with a description, a little more of the types of uses that go with them. Again, standalone residential, we're still talking secondary in these kind of activity centers. And he carried this idea through all the way to neighborhood. So neighborhood he defined as kind of the 5,000 to 50,000 square feet of non-residential. Could be, probably at this point, we're back to more of a horizontal type of spread, but something that really serves the neighborhood immediately around it. Again, still secondary, but a little bit of a different focus, I think, there. So any questions about some of the parameters that he put for the non-residential components in these activity centers? Anything that he didn't put that you would find helpful?
I don't think I see anything at the moment.
It's kind of it is one of those challenges. You don't want to be too prescriptive because you don't want to box yourself in, but you want to give some direction that's meaningful. All right. Then we'll flip over again. This was the one area where the word residential neighborhoods was included, but really we're just talking about neighborhoods, and the fact that a neighborhood can have other uses besides residential. They're just very, very much more limited than an activity center, but it allows for the corner store or the office or service, whether it's a daycare, bank, insurance office, whatever the case might be. So then we flip to, with kind of still the focus on these activity centers, we did ask for him to be sure to carry these ideas through. So on pages 56 and 57, again, we have a little bit more of a description here of the mixed-use activity center typology area. So we're kind of away from these little nodes now, but just the general typology. So there's plenty of spaces on the map that have this. If you think of the area south of White Oak Shopping Center, all of that land that would still be able to develop at the end of Timber Drive where it ends today would be one example of that. So again, a little bit of language here, especially in this second highlighted area, to make sure that the user of the document is not just focusing on that one map that looks like a future land use map, but also making sure that the user is tying it back to that framework map that has the center dots. And then we got into the zoning district matrix to make sure that we had those correct, because these are one of the tools that the planning staff will use. If we see, one of these areas here in the columns on the typology map, we're going to go down and look and see which zoning districts in the UDO would fit each of these. So there were some corrections there. I won't spend time on those because we did talk those through last time. He also did that on page 72 and 73, so some corrections here for building types. Making sure that we had that neighborhood commercial option in the neighborhood typology area. Making sure we had those stacked mixed-use buildings in the retail and employment centers. A few more pages down here on 76 and 77. There was a removal and a better explanation here of the cul-de-sacs. Again, it's not that every cul-de-sac is bad by any stretch of the imagination, but emphasizing that they should be used only where there's environmental constraints or other types of the land backs up to the interstate. You're not going to just cross the interstate with a flyover for every little residential street, obviously. So there may be physical, specific things about the property that make it hard not to use one.
Hey, Jeff?
Yes.
Just want to go back to the typology map real quick. Question. On the neighborhoods, did we discuss at some point, and I can't remember, I apologize, but some sort of recommendation or requirement that neighborhoods consist of more than one type that's listed? Because we had that list that's in there, the single-family, duplex, triplex. Did we discuss something about the recommendation or requirement that a neighborhood consists of more than one type?
43. I think it's on that highlighted section.
Yeah, but, yeah, I thought, I was just curious if we had that, I feel like we discussed that at some point, that it should be not just one type of product. Maybe it was in here. I don't know.
I believe we were talking about it in reference to this, this page layout on page 50 and 51.
Yeah, there, second paragraph, first sentence. I was just curious if that description on the legend is confusing, or maybe not, or maybe gives the impression that you could have a singular type, and
One.
maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but
So, you know, I definitely see that it could. I think that is important, though, why you can't just read the legend in the map. You have to come then to this spread about what neighborhoods really are. So I think as far as staff feels, I think we feel that covers it and
Okay.
conveys it. But I can certainly talk to Matt as to.
no, I
if
think
there's
that's
any other
fine. I mean,
tweak.
no, I agree, we don't want to repeat every word on every page, right?
Right.
Is there maybe an opportunity with the legend, just a little tagline at the bottom says refer to pages, whatever, for descriptions or for definitions?
That definitely would not hurt.
That way, I think, because otherwise you can maybe just stop on that map and kind of miss some of the important nuances of each type.
Yeah, I was just making a quick look to see if there was anything in this text here, but I'm not really seeing it. So yeah, I don't think it would hurt in the legend just to make sure that everybody understands that there's a 2-page spread about each area type for further information. Okay. Absolutely. Then we go down to, so we were down to, I think, page 102 and 103. I asked for some clarity. I think he meant to use this word, but I have a feeling that the artificial intelligence in the software overrode what he was trying to say. And in planning, we talk about activating the streetscape, and the streetscape is activated for the pedestrian. I forget what version of the word active it was using before, but it wasn't quite right. So we asked him just to go through and correct that. I think the other one here on page 103 was just a typo as well. Continuing on pages 108 and 109, I noticed these aren't actually, oh, I'm sorry, 91. I thought these were all 2 pages, but they're not. So on 91, again, the activation issue. This is one that I'm kind of curious if you all have any thoughts on. One, I had him fix. I think he had a ratio in here that was 3-to-1. So I think the issue at first was that the ratio was expressed in the wrong way. Either the text had to change or the numbers had to switch. So he turned it around to the correct ratio, but it does go from 1-to-3 to 1-to-2. And this is the relationship of the building height to the street width. So 1-to-2 gives a little more breathing room. It's not quite so constrained. Asking for the building's height in relationship to the street width. We as staff have heard comments over the years about not always liking to have the tall buildings brought up right to the street. They want to feel like they got a little bit of elbow room to breathe. But that once you're in the development, then that's not so much an issue, but on the primary streets that kind of get you there, not having those 4 and 5 story apartment buildings or mixed use buildings right up on the collector or thoroughfare. And this is, I think this is expressed again as kind of a minimum or not less than. So not letting it get so wide open, but that you do get some sense of enclosure. And it seemed like a lot of communities and some professional agencies, I don't know that Congress for New Urbanism might endorse 1 to 2, but but that seemed to be kind of a minimum accepted practice for being able to provide some sense of enclosure and that you're not just out in the middle of nowhere.
Philip, do you have any comments on that one?
I see the mind turning.
Just trying to figure out whether, what condition is this neighborhood? Are we considering this to be a type of urban instance or suburban instance or rural instance where there is a neighborhood development within, say, an activity center that has density but is not necessarily in the urban context of the town. And in which case, if it is in a more urban context, is that ratio where the streetscape does exist as twice as exists? Does that make sense?
And yeah, it does. And I think that's where we use the other maps, the framework map with the nodes to kind of help inform, okay, maybe in some areas that ratio should be taller. But if it's just just a mix of different types of residential, that this would kind of be the minimum.
So this would be mostly in condition where there is a variety of typologies in one place.
That's how I was looking at it.
Do we think that designates this enough in that we're referring to that specifically?
I think the fact that it's talking about neighborhoods and the different types of things, like, I guess my reading of that was to immediately associate that just with the neighborhood typology, which that's what that is just a mix of different types of residential and the one-off non-residential use here and there.
That may also need to add in some referral, like Mr. Blasco mentioned earlier, in the legend that, please refer to neighborhood description, however we say that.
Right.
So that it's well understood that that's what that means. And I definitely don't want to have a 2-to-1 ratio in a space that it just doesn't make sense where we want to have a character that's reflective of the Garner reflective community preferences that we kind of have in our historical neighborhoods that have spaces and more horizontal.
Yeah.
That would be the only, just to make sure that that's acknowledged that way. That's the only thing I would make sure. So we also don't anchor ourselves in an urban condition where that doesn't necessarily fit.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we could expand on, like you say, we could expand on that a little more, or at least be more clear about, hey, refer to this for additional context about what that preferred ratio should be.
Right.
Yeah, I find that over and over, that would be a great opportunity for a graphic to show
yeah.
what that really means, because I'm trying to think about, a Charleston-style neighborhood where you have a street that's big enough really for two-lane traffic, and then you've got three-story homes does that exceed the ratio, or, so it's trying to, but that can be a very welcoming environment. It's just.
Yes. Yeah, so it seems to be, like I say, most folks talk about it about feeling a sense of enclosure and safety. If definitely more of a rural feel when you do have the larger setbacks, single-story homes. It's kind of the wide open field, but that's what that's supposed to, the character that's supposed to convey. But as you get more into a suburban and more urban, you want to have that, because I guess one of the best ways I can think of it is I've been in some downtowns years ago where buildings were set back, and you had these plazas that were supposed to be, but nobody used them because you didn't feel like you were close enough. It really felt like the wide open in the middle of, whatever. It just wasn't an inviting feel. You kind of felt exposed, even though you had tall buildings around you. They were just so far away.
Right.
So I think that's what it's trying to just get to. But
So kind of in line with that as well, when we say height to street width, does street width also include that plaza or green space that is in the horizontal way, right? That you
yeah.
come out of the building and there's a courtyard or a plaza or green space before the street actually starts. And that also is part of that width of the horizontal, which is not necessarily a street width. It's
Right.
the horizontal.
it's the street plus.
It's the street plus the green space, or a street plus a pedestrian way, or a street plus.
Yeah.
Because in that case, we have a 20-foot building height, or even, say 30-foot building height, and we have a 60-foot roadway. Is that a four-way lane, or it's not? It's going to be two lanes in a neighborhood, more than likely. Maybe if it's a long right of way, maybe a turn lane. But then what happens on the remaining?
Yeah.
10 feet on each side? Is that the green space? Is that common space? It's not street, it's not sidewalk. So I wonder if we say, I don't know how we rephrase street. Is it street and
Or is it building face to building face?
building face to building face?
That to me would make a lot more sense in terms of, I think, along with the direction you're going with this, but yeah. I'm with you.
Because that green space does create the common space that makes that feel like it's a semi-urban context in in a suburban way, where it doesn't become that, like you said earlier, the wide open distance that you're not really connected.
Right.
Yeah, because there's something else that creates the connection.
Yeah, that four-story apartment building feels very different when it's back a sidewalk, when it's 10 feet back versus when it's 30 feet back too. That's different ranges, and there's a very different feel. So I think, to me, if it's really about building face to building face and setbacks, not so much the street, I think calling it the street width is
Yeah.
confusing.
And in that case, the 1 to 3 might be correct. Like I say, I've seen these ratios used two different ways. In more of the urban context, where it is, the buildings actually are right up at the street. So it is pretty much half dozen one the other. But yeah, if rather than street, we're actually talking face of building to face of building, then maybe that 1 to 3 was actually intentional. So I'll ask for clarification on that, and for that just to be more clear. Because certainly if you think about it, in a suburban, you might have your 55 to 60 foot wide right of way, but then you've got at least a 25 foot setback for a front loaded garage. So at that point, you're already up to 115 feet. So yeah, if you want your houses then to be like a 2.5, 3-story house to give you that sense of enclosure, that would be about a 1 to 3 to have at least a 2-story house with a pitched roof.
And I agree with what John said. You know, this might be a good example for where a visual might definitely help to show where you're measuring from, and then also help with the ratios for like non-math people who you know, may not be able to
I
visualize
spent a
that.
little time looking for one. I couldn't find one though that was really conveying what I wanted to send him with my comment, so I didn't want to confuse things either. But I think I can explain that now. That either he's got one that he can pull, or he knows where to go to get something. Because yeah, I agree. A better graphic. I think they tried to kind of do that with that one, particularly that one photo directly below, kind of looking at the courtyard. But
Yeah.
I still think that's a little bit of a different setting as opposed to what I think he's really talking about is for the suburban single lot residential, that's the minimum or the least.
Yeah, because that's not really, this is really isn't showing a street, it's showing a
Right.
pedestrian walkway.
Yeah.
But then, then the other side of it is if you really are talking about the street width and the building height, then what happens beyond the street edge and the face of the building, if that's just setback, then the face-to-face horizontal distance is wider. But I think it's kind of that 6.5, 1, 6. Well, how you say it? 6, 1/2 dozen, whatever. That half dozen, or whichever way we say. Either we're saying that it is street width and building height, and what happens in between is just what happens because the setback is a setback in the neighborhoods or whatever condition it is, or it is specifying a horizontal distance in proportion to the face-to-face of the building and building height. So,
But he also could be looking to set us up for any changes we might as well. So, it could be maybe, I feel like we anticipated a lot of these things when we rewrote the UDO. So there's not actually a whole lot that has to be done, but if we had, say, 35 or, 45-foot setbacks, that might be too far, and that's why you don't feel comfortable. And so maybe we would have needed to adjust our front setbacks accordingly. So I think that might be part of it too. Like I say, I don't think we have that, but it's worth a double check. Okay. All right, page 110, the next one over. Again, here he did kind of some comprehensive rewrites of nearby development and complementing existing neighborhoods. Considering some of the vulnerabilities of neighborhoods. Any questions about what he provided there? I think my biggest takeaway there is that just that infill, and I don't know. I guess one of the questions that I would still have is do we have a good definition of what infill is? I don't think in most cases if you've got 50 to 60 acres, there might be neighborhoods on both sides, yes, but is that really infill? I think most planners would say no. not just a flat out no, but that's certainly much different than 3 or 4 acres surrounded by existing single family neighborhoods. So that would be my one comment, just to ask Matt to go back and say, hey, do we have some good guidance on what infill really is, and when, what are some of the size and acreage and kind of the dimensional standards that we can apply to say, hey, when you meet these things, you should be looking at infill standards.
Helpful. And I also appreciate the second kind of part of that statement of kind of clarifying the importance of vulnerable neighborhoods when there's development and kind of gentrification and pushing out existing context. It's important to make sure that we recognize that should or should not happen. That should not happen when there are residents that live in neighborhoods that can't be displaced because of a new development. And I think that aligns with it needs to fit the character of the existing neighborhood at the same time so that doesn't happen.
Any other thoughts on either one of those paragraphs?
I think it was a good add to include this last sentence on the left-hand side in the bottom, to say that new development should match the character and be consistent with surrounding neighborhoods, because we've had several cases that have come before us where builders are wanting to build something that didn't align with what was existing, and it could create issues for residents. So I think that's a good add.
Yeah, and again, I think, going back to that, okay, what is infill? If it is truly infill, then yes, we need to be a little more, not necessarily looking as much for transition there, because you don't really have enough area to transition to anything. But like I say, if you have the 50 acres, you could do, more of a transition. You can respect the neighborhoods at the edges and then transition to something else.
We have to be ready to stand by that
Yes.
as both commission and council, that this is important and it is not negotiable unless there is distance enough to transition to something that's very different.
But then also being, I think, realistic too about what is different and how different.
Right, there's complementary and there's alignment.
Yeah.
There's you either match what's existing, you complement it, or there's something that's completely opposite.
different.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are ways of doing that and being in that eclectic way where you modernize the existing in a very simple way.
Yeah, because I think we all know the one that we struggle with the most is how do you go from single-family detached to a townhome or something that's attached? Because in the intensity scheme of things, they're right next to each other. But for the majority of folks, no matter where you live, that's, in your world, that's the biggest change. Even though when we step back and we look at the town as a whole, it's not. Even going from a townhome to an apartment these days, because the apartments are 4 and 5 stories with the enclosed hallways. I mean, that's a whole lot different, area-wise, massing-wise. But it's that single family to 2 or 3 put together. And how do you make that? So that's where I do think, how do you get everybody kind of wrapped around that? So what kind of things can we ask those folks to do from a design perspective to make it not so jarring to folks?
Yeah, and there were in some of Matt's images in our conversations, I don't know what page that's on. I mean, he shows some examples of that mixing of, 2 or 3 different types of
That on
residential homes.
115.
Is that 115?
It's in the revised copy.
It's in the new one? Oh, yeah, it's in the new
Is
one.
that
I'm looking at that one.
there at the bottom?
It looks so straightforward in the transition graphics.
Well, and everything looks the same in those, and that's not the
Yes.
reality of
Yes.
what you're discussing,
Yeah.
because most of the single-family homes are gonna be of a certain era, and then your new builds are probably not gonna line up with that structure. So,
The ranch made things a whole lot more difficult.
And am I to understand, so with if, when you were talking about like the 50 or 60 acres, there's not a specific number attached to how much land there has to be available, like, if people are approaching with concerns about it, at some point, is there a standard?
That's why I want to ask him for that, because I don't think we as staff feel that we do. I mean, I think we kind of feel like we have some best practices and experience from others, that, hey, for the most part, we can tell infill from not infill.
Yeah.
But then when you get down to the nitty gritty, that, 5 to 15 acres, sometimes it depends on how it's structured.
Yeah, this is-
If it's a nice square, it probably tends not to feel quite so much infill, but if it's a
hilly
long.
versus
Right.
or buffers or different.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So sometimes it just depends on the very specifics of the
Yeah.
tract of land that we're talking about too. So yeah, I would like to see if he knows off the top of his head if there's or has access to some resources that, hey, if you get this narrow or you get this small area wise, that's really when those kind of things should kick in. So we'll come right back to that page. But I will stop here on 113 as well, because we had 2 more sections that were rewritten on how to find partners to join in exploring ways to support more local workforce housing and study opportunities to establish affordable housing incentive overlays. I think again, there was just a general ask to try to flesh these out a little more and give a little more guidance as to things we could consider.
I'd say I felt like this took that affordable housing conversation a step or two further, because I think where in past documents it's been, yes, we want affordable housing, rah, 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 but that was it. Partly because of restrictions that are on municipalities and whatnot, but, so I think this offering up some suggestions of other creative methods is, pushes that conversation forward.
Yeah, and actually specifying that, a house does not need to be a 2,500 square foot, 2-story, $600,000 house to be something that is
desirable.
desirable. Not everyone has 4 or 5 children or 5 people living in a household that does not necessarily need that, like workforce, young professionals just coming out of school, and that we want them to move here from wherever they are. right? That kind of,
That would be the starter house.
The starter,
that they
yeah.
said has phased out. That's
Right.
gone away. Is
That's
what
the
Matt
townhome.
told us. Yeah, it's a townhome
And
now.
the single-family house, that becomes that smaller single-family house.
that's affordability too with the starter home.
Yeah, I like the way that these are elaborated on, that they're side by side. In many ways, workforce housing, you are talking about affordable housing. I like that the statement is made there, firm and clear on one page of the plan.
And some of those things that I see in the second, column there, they're not, on the one hand, they're not major things, but can you cut back on a parking requirement? Can you, currently we don't have an expedited review process for anything, but, maybe this is, maybe this is the one thing that we could. We always hear time is money. So I think right now, particularly in the affordable housing discussion, any little bit, can help. So that's kind of one of my takeaways too, is that, hey, it may not seem like a lot, but it's something that we should probably consider.
Have you seen that on the news where there are neighborhoods that like property management companies build with homes that are not for purchase but for rent, for like families or for people rebuilding credit or, for whatever reason?
We've had a few of those proposals.
So I think that would be interesting for us to maybe explore for affordable housing.
One of my favorite little anecdotes when I'm meeting with somebody who's in the home building industry, I always like to ask, what happened to Corian? It's like every house these days, no matter how big or small it is, you have to have a granite countertop. I'm like, I don't know. When I was younger, I guess maybe the housing industry has just passed me by. But I remember the days when you had your Formica countertop and you wanted to get rid of that, so you got Corian countertops. I actually looked them up; they still exist. Granted, their focus now is on looking like granite, but yeah. Alrighty, and then we were just looking at this one. Again, I think this was mostly just some terminology type here. This was where we had the missing middle language, and we were asked to come up with, hey, let's just say what it is, and not use that term. So small format multifamily, which that's kind of what it is. Then, yeah, the next ones that I see are just on, again, the activation, and then he did change the spotlight here on page 128 and 129. I wish I had the previous one. Was this just a change to the title? I don't recall, or if this was a brand new.
I think this might be a new page.
Regardless, I think this was the desire to, again, put the emphasis on, hey, when we're reviewing applications that come in, the town and town council and y'all are really going to be looking at, hey, what is the long-term financial stability? Are we making that positive value add to the community? Is it going to support itself and sustain itself over time and be a positive positive impact in financial and otherwise. And I think this will also tie it a little more closely to the cost of services study that Matt's been doing for our finance department and management folks. And then again, just some changes in proper terminology on the some of the long-term transit programs that are happening. And then we get all the way to the end of the document on page 259, where, whoop, I was right there. At one of the meetings, it was brought up too that when we did the first Garner Forward plan, we did have a citizen survey that we did. Now, the nature of surveys have changed, I would say, even in here in the last 5 years. It's almost to the point now where if you're going to get meaningful information out of a survey, you really have to do a scientific survey, just because social media has allowed factions to dominate the discussions. So I think Matt was saying that, yes, that can be a good thing, but I think we need to take a look at, how we do that, and see if there's a way to implement a survey like the one that we had before, and maybe even using a lot of the same questions, I would think. But can we do it in a way that's achievable from an affordability standpoint? Because scientific surveys usually aren't inexpensive these days. But being able to do some kind of survey that's meaningful, again, to chart our progress over time and how people are feeling about our implementation of this plan and the rules that go with it.
I think keeping in mind accessibility too, because even when you talk about social media surveys, you're not including probably a large population, especially in Garner, that would have input into a survey. So keeping that in mind too.
Surveys are great. Much tougher than it seems like, than it used to be. So that covers the text changes. Walking away with a couple of things to get a little more feedback on and some additional explanation, but otherwise, do you feel like we're in a fairly good place?
Yeah.
I think this document and the changes that have been made over the course of the development have really moved the needle, I think, in a good direction. It really takes what we did in 2018 and makes a big improvement.
Well, I'll leave it up to y'all as to whether you want to give some kind of motion and some kind of recommendation to the council at this meeting. If we are going to be meeting jointly and have a quorum at the work session, we have to call that for y'all as, I believe, a special called meeting anyhow. I would need to check with the powers that be, but I think we could actually recess into a different room just for the planning commission, and you could make your recommendation then, and we would just have it in, the minutes of that special meeting. But what do y'all think?
I guess my first question is, do we anticipate a quorum at the work session? I don't know who's responded, who can or cannot go, but I do intend to be there.
I'm not able to attend.
That was July 25, was it? Or am I-
At 6. The 25th at 6.
22nd? day of the week? Yeah, I could do that.
Okay. So we have 3 of us so far. 4. That would be a quorum.
Again, it's up to you. If you all feel that you're comfortable now to just say, hey, with these changes that we've discussed, you can do it tonight if you wanted to. But if you want to wait until we have that collective meeting, that is certainly fine too.
Well, that being said, I'm comfortable. I think the changes that we made tonight improved it another step. I'm comfortable with all that we discussed. So, I, for one, am comfortable with moving on it now.
Say that too. If we needed to have some discussion on that at the work session, we could always elaborate with council on something that they have a question on.
Yeah, I think generally I'm comfortable. The one advantage of waiting until the work session is to take in any additional comments that council may have and further that conversation. If I don't know that would change anything at this point, but that would be the only or the biggest advantage is to get their comments first. But just a thought.
I'll just throw this out there too. This wouldn't come back to them, to the council for a final decision until probably the second meeting in August. So even if we can't work it out to, do the recess or to another room to do it at that meeting, we could conceivably just save the vote until your August meeting too. Although it'd be nice for us as staff to be able to prep the staff report for council a little sooner. But that's a small thing.
Given what I've heard tonight, I think I think if there's any further discussion amongst the commission members tonight, but I think we are definitely in position to do something with this tonight. So I think we're all in agreement that there's a vote that's ready to be had at some point this evening. I did have one more comment, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. If we're done with I think we're in agreement that we'll all make a motion and take a vote at some point. Okay. I just had one more comment that I wanted to make. Going back to the initiatives and the floodplain protection, and this may be more in conjunction with a UDO update or text amendment maybe, as opposed to being a update to the initiative, but number 2, the floodplain protection. I think that's a really strong initiative, an important initiative, but are there things we can do to strengthen that through increased stormwater requirements during development periods? Maybe if it's, for example, what we did with the Swift Creek Apartments, and they're developing right at Swift Creek, which is a very sensitive area. They voluntarily, or maybe at the request of, I can't remember if it's at the request of the town, but they, rather than adhere to state minimum standards, they increased their standard protection to the 100-year storm. Is there an opportunity to maybe define, whether it's this or through a text amendment in the UDO, is that if you're in a floodplain, then we expect you to treat the 100-year versus the 25, or would be one thought I had.
So I don't have anybody from engineering here tonight, but we have been having a pretty robust discussion here as of late about stormwater and what they're seeing, in the last few years, and they're starting to just require that more in a lot of other areas of town. I know I've got some of my folks here from Greenbrier, and that is one area that that the town has been asking for higher levels of stormwater detention. But just the other day, we were in a completely other part of town, and they were making comments about Yeah, there's some of the development in this area, we're starting to see issues, so we're asking for, again, the 100-year instead of the 50-year treatment. And then there's the whole discussion, how familiar are all of you with what's called a level spreader? No?
Just me.
If you've
Mr.
ever,
Moreland.
if you've ever been, sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can't. In my own neighborhood, one of my neighbors has one in their backyard, but it's like the big riprap, and it's supposed to take the stormwater discharge and the water that's hitting it. You know, it kind of breaks it up and slows it down, and it's supposed to kind of ease the transition from the channeled stormwater flow into the stream or into the
Kind
pond.
of spreads it out.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Well, the state no longer recognizes those as an effective measure for, what is it, providing the diffuse flow. It's supposed to, diffuse the flow. So there's a lot of discussion right now about, okay, well, and almost every development use those. So now what do we do? And right now the state doesn't have an answer for us. So, we're having to think through different ways of stormwater treatment.
Do you know why? Was it just not as effective as they?
I think a lot of it had to do with probably maintenance for one, and then two, it just, I don't know if maybe the size of things, it just didn't seem to, or maybe it's just the fact that the storms have gotten that much.
Larger.
Yeah, the volume is just so much higher and the velocity is so much faster. But yeah, they're just not accomplishing what they were. They're still seeing channelization and erosion beyond them into the stream. So, yeah, I think there's though some things that we can do on the UDO side. I think having it in here, I think that probably the best emphasis is just that, hey, we need to be aware of the patterns of what's happening and adjust our standards accordingly.
Also, to just the encouragement of using green infrastructure and low impact development strategies is. If there's any way to encourage that, maybe it's just a sentence to that floodplain protection, or maybe it's protect sensitive waterways, or I don't know. But just anyway, we can encourage newer technologies, newer strategies that are.
And we've been talking a lot about those as well. I know Jacqueline has told me in the past that some of those low impact things, I guess it's not as definitive as to the nitrogen benefits, I think was what she said. So they're good at like one half of it, but it's questionable about the other half. So you still have to have something, another device or something to address the quality side of it. I don't know if it's quality or the quantity, but one.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, but I can certainly, ask him if there's anything that would help beef that up and give us a little more basis for when the time comes.
I feel like this initiative focused more so on land use than it did on the environmental impact. I think it needs to be both, not just land use. But
Gotcha. Okay.
that was all I had in terms of comments, other than just to reiterate what we've said the last couple of times, is just that excited to see this happen, excited to see it go forward. I think you all and Matt did a great job with it, and I think we've had some pretty good feedback from folks around town. So much appreciated. Thanks for all your efforts and late nights and everything else.
Thank you.
And thanks for letting us be a part of it. All right, with that, since you all seem to be excited about making a motion, Is there a motion?
Draft plan to go forward to council with our recommendation. Is that enough?
With recommendation for, with recommendation for,
Or approval?
all right. We have a motion and a second.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to recommend for approval with the conversations included today as edits to the document. And I will call the vote. Gina Avent.
Aye.
John Blasco.
Aye.
Jehan Hodges. Philip Jefferson. Sherry Phillips. And Michael Whalen. Unanimous.
All right, thank you all. Looking forward to the discussion with council in a couple weeks. Please.
I'm Jeff Swain and resident at 263 Shady Hollow Lane at the Village of Asboro. Just congratulations tonight on what you've just accomplished. And of course, having had my comments previously, I was really pleased to hear the commentary and the new text regarding workforce housing, affordable housing, and also mentioning, and I'm not sure what the text reads exactly, but the compatibility between existing neighborhoods and surrounding new development. I think whatever that text language is, I hope it's something we can grab onto so that when development proposals come through, we can make good judgments in that regard for compatibility purposes. Going forward, just a couple of comments, because I have mentioned to at least one town council member that I thought this plan was like a Trojan horse if they read all of the detail in the plan, and particularly, and there's been no discussion last meeting or tonight about the implementation matrix, the 66 recommendations. I think that there may be some agreement that the 2018 plan, if it fell short, it was in that there was not a following progress. So indeed, I hope there are some metrics that come out of the plan as it relates to implementing recommendations, so that there is indeed a feeling when it gets, and I really applaud the fact too that there's been reference to a survey which can assist in the eventual monitoring process or done. I know the plan calls for a report each year. I don't know whether you would do a survey every year. That seems a little ambitious to me, but some means for charting the progress. Well, then I think also there needs to be a way for people to understand what it is that's expected to be accomplished, which leads me to another comment, which is regarding neighborhoods. I guess a question I would have, I'm at the Village at Eversboro. Now we're 14, 15 years old. We fought off one zoning change 6, 7 years ago. Indeed, we got a much preferred development after that little fight, but there's still some vacant land nearby us. So would there be opportunities for neighborhoods or a collection of neighborhoods to come together with the planning staff, presumably, to talk about, okay, what is in this plan for us? Because so much of what is in the plan, in my mind, is related to new development and new standards, because, of course, the whole point was to try to grab hold of the character for Garner, and a lot of that character comes going forward. However, how will the existing neighborhoods also benefit from some of the standards and some of the discussions? And when I heard discussion about streetscape, that thought came to my mind. Well, you've got a lot of existing streets in this city, in this town. But anyway, I would like you to give some thought, and I guess particularly the administration, on how to reach out to individual or collections of neighborhoods to help people understand what is in this plan for those who live here now, as we continue to grow. And in that regard, communications. I would hope that perhaps the website could be updated, because it still showed town council adopting the plan, I think, next week, which was the hoped-for date. So if that could be updated with some new dates. And also I wondered if this text, the new text, will be available in advance of whenever it is that the council will be taking it up, and that would also be put on the website. So in other words, there's some things going forward that I think will help to really bring the benefits of this plan home to everybody in the town. Thanks very much. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swain. Appreciate it. I think we are ready to move on to planning director reports.
So yeah, I guess as far part of the first part of my report, again, just notice that the purpose, these are not the actual suggested language of UDO amendments, but they do give you a sense of the direction that we're headed. I'll have to have those drafted shortly in order to make that meeting. So do look for that to be published and distributed to you within the next week or so. And but if you do have any questions, if you've had a chance to look over it, otherwise feel free to also just reach out to me via email or give me a call, whichever.
Sounds good.
Okay. Let me see what else I had. On the staffing front, we've been making some progress. We have an acceptance. I may have told you this last month, I'm not sure. We do have an acceptance of an offer for our planning technician position. A gentleman by the name of Thomas, I'm going to blank on his last name. I shouldn't, because I think it was kind of Dutch, which is my own family. I was like, oh, I don't see Dutch names too often.
We'll just call him Tom.
Yes. But he will be starting the first week of August. And then we've also extended an offer which has been accepted for our GIS position. His name is Corey Bisson. He's coming to us from Fayetteville. So we will have that position. He actually starts a week earlier than Thomas. And then we're in the middle of getting ready to extend an offer on the development review manager. So things are beginning to fall in place. But again, those of you in the field, if you know anybody who's interested in transportation planning, I still have a transportation planner position. Those are still proving very hard to fill. But I take a little bit of solace that we're not the only community in Wake County that's having that struggle. But definitely excited for some folks to be coming on and giving the rest of the team and myself a little more room to breathe, right? Just trying to think if there was anything else. The pedestrian plan will be coming to you at your next meeting. That is going to, oh, yes, thank you. Thomas Waltersdorf. It actually wasn't Dutch, it was German. Let's see. Yes, pedestrian plan will be coming to you. Yeah, it should be next month because we're having the public hearing for that at the council meeting next week. So assuming that they refer it to you all, So we'll be sending that document out. I think some of you had been involved in that periodically. I'm not sure who might have been the reps from this commission to that committee.
I think Mr. Carson might have been.
Yeah, that was kind of thinking the same thing. I think Ralph was one of the representatives. Anything else, Ashley, that you can think of?
I don't think so. Don't think there are any cases.
Yeah, we haven't had a lot of cases moving through right at the moment, so. Any
Surprising. It's been a quiet few months for cases.
It has. We have a lot of projects that are moving through like the second step. So they've been through y'all for the rezoning part, but now they're coming back with their plans. So we're still plenty busy. It's just not on the front end. It's more the middle and
Sure.
the other pieces. But that is kind of affecting too, the fact that we're still that busy. It does affect our ability to, move the new things along too. We have a lot of plan modifications, which are just handled administratively and things like that. But there are still some cases coming. There is one rezoning, a tier 1 rezoning that's going to council as well here this month. So again, if that one gets referred, you'll have that on your calendar for next month too. So I think we'll see not a dramatic pickup, but maybe one a month for the next few months. I've kind of purposely been trying, though, to keep things manageable with the plan adoptions, because I don't want to shortchange this stuff. And give you ample time to be able to focus on the plans.
Gotcha. Okay. I've been hearing from folks out and about. The southeast area study from Campo was out and seems to be visible. I've heard people concerned about it and whatnot. Just, I don't know if you had any general thoughts or.
So just a couple of weeks ago, we did have community outreach where they hosted up here in our second floor training room. And they have been pushing a kind of a new second round of public outreach for that plan. So I know when we had the open house here a couple weeks ago, there were still some things that we as staff were making comments on of things to be adjusted and tweaked. But yeah. Anything of note that you...
I think people were just more worried about, roads being connected in their neighborhoods that they weren't expecting, and which I've tried to allay the concerns that that's a long ways away. So, my assumption is that there's probably not much imminent coming out of that, based on how DOT works and how we build roads anyway, but.
Right. Yeah, that's always one of the big concerns. It's a big change in folks' lives. We just had some inquiries from, a couple of neighborhoods in the southern part of the jurisdiction, and we're just trying as staff to be, much more just upfront and honest with them that, in some cases it's legally provided access. It's there for a reason, and explaining the difference between what things are considered temporary versus what things are permanent, and just letting them know that, hey, some things can be addressed that are concerns, some things won't be, some things may be somewhere in the middle. But yeah.
Yeah, it seems like most, if not all, things will be addressed as development occurs, not proactively to.
Yeah, we're not seeing state money spent on little neighborhood residential roads, for sure.
Yep.
Other than maintaining them in their current status where they own them.
Any other things for Mr. Triesenberg?
And I'll give my monthly report on the VA clinic. It's going great guns. It's all leveled. They have the elevator shafts up. They have the framing for the main building starting to go up, so starting to see real progress. Unless you know differently, Jeff.
No, I mean, I understand that the project is moving along. There is an associated DOT project to improve not only that intersection, but now they've actually expanded the scope of it. So they'll be doing improvements from not only at the Rand intersection, but all the way up to the Buffalo section as well. So they're doing some prep work for that, and eventually there will be a parallel bridge next to the existing bridge. So they're kind of setting it up for that to happen. So some different things that are happening. Both will remain signalized, but it will have more of a super street type flow, but not exactly. It's kind of a hybrid. But they are looking at some considerable investments and improvements to help those intersections work better.
All right, anything else? Hearing none, we will bring the meeting to a close.